Welcome everyone. In this video we'll be going through working with a worksheet at an intermediate level. Now in the beginner's course we went through all the details of Excel, how to use it, where everything is, where all the tabs are. For the intermediate course we're going to be doing something similar but a little bit more complex and at a higher level. So just a few tips and tricks on how to use it and some more of the advanced features that a beginner probably wouldn't really use. So the first thing we're just going to be talking about is just changing the worksheet view. And you'll be able to see this up in the view tab up here. So if you go to view, there's a few different ways we can look at a page. Okay, so by default we're going to look at the normal view, which has the little Excel cells in here visible. Now there's a few things that I would normally change depending on who the audience is and what I'm using the Excel workbook for. Is number one is just unticking the grid lines. It just makes your Excel spreadsheet a little bit more professional. If you're inserting a table, let's see over here, we're not going to have the background data cells, which makes it a little bit uglier, and we can actually copy and paste this into an Excel spreadsheet or a PowerPoint, and it's going to look a lot more professional. So that's probably the first thing I would do. The next thing that I would do is understand the page break view. So whenever you're printing something, and this was the last chapter of the beginner's Excel workbook, but whenever you're printing something, just because you've got it in a table doesn't mean that's necessarily how it's going to print in the best way in Excel. So the page break view actually tells you where Excel by default is going to cut off your table when you're printing it. And you can also get a page print preview just over here in the print tab. As you can see over here, it'll show you there's the cutoff line, and any settings you change over here in the print page is going to be reflected here in the page break view as well. So if we change, say, this to an A3 page and put it in landscape, it's going to give us a lot more room over here when we want to actually print it. And let's put it into landscape as well, and then we'll put it into narrow as well. Okay, so we can fit a whole lot more, and once we go back, you'll see that the page break view is being pushed over here. What I want to show you is there are some customizable options for the headings and formula bar, so you can actually turn those off if you prefer to, perhaps if you're presenting your workbook, or if you use your keyboard for moving around against certain cells, etc., and you don't need it. It's just a preference way. I tend to leave those two ticked and this one unticked. Now the next thing that I want to show you is just this zoom feature. Now ordinarily when you're showing someone an Excel workbook, by default you can end up looking like this in the zoom function. What we can do is, if we want to quickly show someone a particular cell, let's say this 16 value over here, we can go zoom to selection, and Excel is automatically going to make this really big, so you don't have to fiddle around with the zoom feature and say, okay, is this kind of the zoom function I want? So it's just down here in the corner, so you can either drag it along this bar, which is quite fiddly, or you can press plus or minus and zoom in, but then you might zoom in to the wrong cell by accident and over here, but you wanted to show them the 16 back there. So that's just a good way of quickly zooming into a particular cell. Just select on the cell or area that you want and just goes zoom to selection. So that's a cool little feature. Also, if you want to revert back to your standard view, you've also got this shortcut over here, which is just zoom to 100%. And that's as opposed to going back here and after you've zoomed in, pressing the little minus button until you're at an appropriate zoom in area. Just press the 100% zoom and that'll get you back to default from your zoom selection. You can also press zoom button here and that'll give you a customizable level of magnification. So you've got your default 75%, 50%, or you can fit selection. Or you can do custom. So if we want to do, say, 60%, that will work as well. So handy way of navigating the zoom buttons over here. The feature I want to show you, which is an intermediate feature of navigating Excel, is just these buttons up the top, which is the new window, arrange all, and freeze panes. So the most important one is this new window over here. So if you click this, have a look at what the name of the file is called. So if we click that, all of a sudden you've got these 1 and 2 populating in the name of the Excel workbook. And the reason it's doing that is it's telling you it's got 2 instances of the workbook open. So if I'm working on this spreadsheet between different tabs, what I can do is just move this screen to the right hand side. So I'll do that on my keyboard by pressing the Windows button and to the right key. And then it'll give me the options of what Excel file I want to split over here. So the first thing you'll notice is it's now the exact same file on either side of my screen. So it makes it very easy to review a workbook or to link between two different tabs. So for example, if this is my summary table over here, and I want to do a sum if of my individuals over here, it makes it a lot easier to do it this way. Let me just clean this up. It makes it a lot easier to do it this way. Sum if range there, a selecting that, and then the total value I want row F. So I've got my formula here, so linking into this tab over here, range, but then pulling the criteria from this tab, and then sum range F, and just dragging that down. So as you can see, this is way faster and easier than if I had just been working off a single tab and just going equals sum if, and then going back to tab 1, selecting it, and then choosing the criteria back on this tab, going A, and then going back to the original tab to pull the sum range. So it's a lot faster and easier if we do it over two tabs like this. Now, you can create multiple versions of this. If you've got a multi-screen set up in your work office or at home, you can have 3 screens and just drag it across to the screen that you want to work on, and it's a really efficient way of doing your work. If you happen to lose all your Excel windows like so, what you can do is you can press this Arrange All, and it's going to put all of your Excel windows that you have open in an arranged format, so it's just a good way of tracking where they all are. Now in terms of closing them down, let's say you want to go back to your just a single main window, what you can do is just click, well first of all check the name, and if you see a number over here, it means you've got this, you've got multiple instances of this file open. If I press X, instead of prompting me to say, you know, have you saved this file, etc., it's going to let me close it, and the reason is I haven't closed the whole Excel file, I've just closed that particular window that I've created. However, if I were to close this one, notice how the numbers disappeared. This means that I've no longer got multiple windows open, and this is just the original Excel workbook. So if I close this now, it's going to prompt me to save it. Do you want to save changes? Okay, so if you get that warning, make sure that you have actually saved it, or you're going to lose your work if you close it and don't save it. So I'm just going to cancel that. Okay, so the next thing that I want to show you is just this freeze panes. So if I zoom to selection, okay, so let's say I want to scroll down a very long list of data, but by the time I get down here, I've forgotten, is that the purchase price, is that the sale price? I've forgotten which one's which. I need to have the title showing at all time. So the way to fix this is to select the cells that you want to, we're going to call it freeze or stay in place. We want to select these. Now, I also want you to select the row below it as well, because what we have to do is it's going to default by selecting this, the last in between. So between 3 and 4 is the last one. So it's counterintuitive, but when you're freezing rows, you have to select the ones you want plus 1 extra. Okay, and then what we want to do is we're going to go freeze panes up here, and then we've got a few options. So we've got freeze panes, which is based on your current selection, as it says here, which is what we want to do. But we can also just quickly freeze the top row or freeze the first column, and then you don't have to select anything. You can just go freeze top row, and as you see, that bit will scroll down. But obviously that's not what we want to do. We want to freeze all of these ones, so we're going to go freeze freeze panes, and now when we scroll down, these ones are all going to stay in place. So what I might do is make this a bit smaller. I'm going to delete the first row, and delete this one too, and now it's a whole lot easier to see. So as we can scroll down, we know that this one is the selling price and this one is the purchase price. It's a really good way of doing it. We can also unfreeze it. So let's say I no longer want this frozen because I want to scroll down, or perhaps I want to freeze a different area. What we can do is we can go unfreeze panes like this, and now when I scroll down, it's no longer frozen. You can also just, now we've deleted those other rows, we can just quickly go freeze top row, and now it's the same impact. Let's unfreeze that. We could also freeze the first column, so let's do that. And as you can see, no longer is the row frozen, but if we scroll over this way to the right, this column here is going to stay in place no matter how far we scroll across. Okay, so that's freezing. What about splitting and hiding? Okay, so in the instance where you want to freeze both this one, so the first column and the first row, you can't do that with the freeze panes, but there is a way of doing this with this function over here, which is split, although it does have some pros and cons, so you really got to consider whether or not you want to do this, but there is a way of doing it. So the way you do that is you select this cell here, and this cell is the first cell after the first row and after the first column, so it's this one here. We're going to press this split button up here, and what it says is it's going to divide the window into different panes that each scroll separately. So let's see what happens. So now, as you can see, there's this gray line coming down here in between the first and second column, and there's also a gray line in between the first and second row. And basically, in between, as it said in the description, as soon as you select up here, it can scroll independently of this one. And same with the column, it can scroll independently of this one over here. Now, the benefit is I can now scroll both down and across, and the first column and the first row are going to stay locked in place, which means I can at all stage I can know what item number it is and what field or type of data is in here at times. Now the main downside to this is if anyone else is working in the workbook and they accidentally say select up here and start pressing down on their keyboard, they're going to suddenly screw it up because it's scrolling independently. So if I then select down here and scroll down, it's going to be very confusing. We've got a locked header here, but then these cells are up here moving, which is actually the cells down here. So if we want to undo that, just press split again. So it can be a good way of reading data and understanding data in a table, but just be careful of the downsides of this. I want to emphasize is just proper formatting of Excel workbooks. So we touched on this in the beginner course of Excel, is this cell style category up here. Now by default, Excel has a number of cell styles that you can use, or you can create your own. So we've got, by default, under the category of data and modeling, we've got calculation, output, check cell, input, note, linked cell. Now this is really important for Excel models. Look at the best practice model over here, you'll notice that there's all kinds of different color schemes going on. It's really important for models because you need to be able to differentiate between, for a user reading an Excel workbook, which cells they need to put values in or change values, which cells are calculations so that they know not to touch those, which cells are linked cells so that a cell is coming from an original tab, and so forth. So it's to make sure all your workbooks are really clear, easy to understand, and that anyone picking up knows exactly where a number is coming from, how it's calculated, where it's going to, and so forth. So if you look in this model over here, we've got a number of inputs in the input tab which are formatted as a yellow cell. So you can see they're formatted like this over here. And they'll probably also have a tab in here which kind of explains to you what each of those different things mean as well. Now you'll have, so the input cells are yellow, and then you've got these calculation cells which are a different style as well, so you know not to change anything in those numbers, and everything's very clearly laid out, easy to read, easy to understand. So yeah, just make sure you use different cell styles and be consistent when you actually prepare your workbook. That's probably my only comment on this. My next one is just around inserting, deleting rows and columns. So it sounds pretty basic, and we did cover this in the basic course, but what I want to emphasize is just when you're inserting rows and columns, just get used to the keyboard shortcuts to be able to do this. So instead of selecting the row and right-clicking, inserting or deleting, the way we were going to do this, instead of selecting the range and deleting it, or some people go up here, select the row, delete cell, or delete row, or insert rows. It's a very slow way of doing it. So what I want to get you in the habit of doing is just using your keyboard. So the first thing we're going to do is press Control Space, and that's going to select an entire column. Now the next thing, instead of going right click insert, we're going to go Control Shift plus, and that effectively adds in a column. And you can do the same thing for a row as well. So if you press Shift Space, we can select a row, and then it's the same keyboard shortcut, so Control Shift plus, and that adds in a row. So it's a really good keyboard shortcut, so you can select multiple rows like that, and you can do Control Shift plus and then insert rows for those as well. So really good, quick way of navigating Excel. Talking about is working with multiple worksheets or workbooks. So obviously in this tab we've got a lot of tabs over here, but let's say we want to pull in data from another workbook, which is over here. I want to do a summary of all of the items which have this code over here, but I want to summarize it in this workbook over here. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to paste those values and just double check that there's no duplicate values. I'm going to do a conditional formatting, so that all checks out, and then I'm going to do a sum if based on those values over here. So the sum range over here is going to be column A in this workbook, and then I'm going to be using this cell over here as my reference, and then I'm going to pull out the quantity like so. Now the first thing, let me just realign that by dragging that down. So the first thing you'll notice is that when we do that, first of all, it shows the location of the spreadsheet in the formula bar that I'm pulling the data from. The second thing is if whenever we're linking to another workbook, it hard codes those cells automatically. It locks those cells as absolute references automatically. You'll notice that the D14 isn't hard coded. It isn't absolutes, but we're going to put that in its relative currently, so we're just going to make sure that the column is absolute. So when we lock that down, we can then drag this down and it should pull those values as well. So all of these, it's the same situation. It's referencing the workbook we're pulling from. As a general principle, however, I would recommend not pulling in between two separate workbooks. And the reason is because if we close out this workbook and reopen it at a later date, so if I press enter now, what I'm going to get is a value or a ref error. And the reason is because Excel can no longer access the workbook that you had open. If you ever get a ref error, these are very difficult to fix. And what's going to happen to the formula is it's going to go sum if ref value ref. So you won't actually know the cell reference that you were trying to pull out from the other workbook. So instead of doing that, what I recommend you do is you actually hard code the data as source that you want to use, put it into a new tab, paste the data here, and just reference up here where you got the hard coded data. Say source from XLX workbook can be found in this location. Insert your location here, and then updated on XXX. And then what you can do with these hard-coded values, which you can do a special paste, Control Shift like this, paste as values, then there won't be any links, etc. that you have, and you just have a normal formula. Now you'll notice that when you are linking in between two different workbooks, all your links are going to be populated here. So if you go to the Data tab and then press Edit Links, you'll be able to see all the Excel links that you have active. And anytime you see a link in here, it's a real risk for you. So whenever you're working with a workbook, just make sure, open this Edit Links button, and if you have links in here, what I would do is first of all investigate them, see if you can't relink the data by hard coding it into this workbook. If you can't, you can always do this break link option over here. So you can break link like so. But what that will do is if we go back to the tab we were working from, is it's now going to hard code these values, so you're going to lose the formula that you were using. So again, another reason why you shouldn't be linking in between workbooks, even though so many people do it. It's bad practice. So that's everything in the chapter on just working with worksheets. The next chapter we're going to be talking about some of the more advanced techniques that you need to know as an intermediate user.